Welcome to Path Presents Abuse Prevention and Panel Dialogue with Elizabeth Clements from Hidden Water. We had a problem with the start of the recording, and so this is a redo of the introductions of the speakers in the panel. You'll miss a little bit of Elizabeth describing her work before she starts her slides. I'm hoping to cover it here and bridge the recording from last night in a way that makes sense. This program was sponsored by PATH, PEA Alumni for Truth and Healing, which was founded in 2018 by concerned alumni and survivors of abuse at Phillips Exeter Academy, PEA. Our mission is to ensure that survivors have safe, emotionally supported pathways to access the resources they need. We also work to foster a survivor-centered, community-driven healing response to sexual abuse and misconduct within the Academy. With the support of alumni, PATH has raised and distributed nearly $50,000 to PEA survivors in need. We have matched survivors with alumni therapists and facilitate monthly support circles to encourage dialogue, provide community, and help survivors connect with one another. In addition, PATH is promoting ongoing community dialogue by bringing in speakers who specialize in trauma, healing, and survivor advocacy. Past speakers include Dr. Judith Herman, renowned author, researcher, and psychiatrist who spoke last September. This year we are so proud to host Elizabeth Clements from Hidden Water and Dr. Charol Shakeshaft. Some of you may know me. I am Anne Millarb, graduate of Phillips Exeter Academy, class of 1981, and the co-founder of PATH. As a survivor of sexual assault by two teachers at Exeter, sexual abuse prevention is very important to me, as well as supporting others who have experienced childhood sexual abuse. I am an advocate for systemic change within educational institutions and how sexual abuse is addressed or not addressed in school communities. I'm a provider of personalized support to many survivors of childhood trauma. In addition to direct support, I am an assistant to Sarah Payton, a neuroscience educator and author. For Sarah, I support her many programs on trauma healing and recovery, which focus on the research behind why traumatic events can be so devastating and the importance of resonant connection in the healing process. I'm a volunteer circle keeper at Hidden Water, Green Circles for Survivors of Childhood Sexual Abuse. A core part of my work has been supporting other alumni harmed from Exeter and connecting them to resources through PATH. I am passionate about raising awareness and encouraging schools like Exeter to adopt survivor-centered, trauma-informed approaches to addressing sexual abuse and misconduct. I would like to also introduce Julia Gray, my co-founder and colleague at PATH, to whom I'm very grateful. Her work with survivors of harm at Phillips Exeter Academy, including her own experience of sexual assault on campus, inspired her to pursue a graduate degree in social work. Julia now works as a psychotherapist in private practice, supporting clients with a range of mental health issues. Following her own experience at Exeter, she was an advocate for the school to take stronger action in addressing sexual violence, particularly emphasizing the need for bystander education and responsibility. Her ongoing advocacy work with PATH remains a central part of her professional and personal commitment to healing and change. Speaking tonight alongside Elizabeth Clements is Dr. Charol Shakeshaft. Dr. Shakeshaft is a distinguished professor at Virginia Commonwealth University with over 30 years of experience researching and addressing sexual abuse in educational settings. Her groundbreaking work focuses on understanding how schools enable sexual misconduct and, more importantly, how they can prevent it. Dr. Shakeshaft's expertise has made her a leading authority on safeguarding students from abuse, and she has worked extensively with both public and independent schools across the United States to help them strengthen organizational safeguards and foster safer environments for students. Dr. Shakeshaft's latest book, Organizational Betrayal: How Schools Enable Sexual Misconduct and How to Stop It, published by Harvard Education Press this month, November 2024, offers a critical analysis of the systemic issues that allow sexual abuse to persist in schools. Drawing on decades of research, the book provides actionable insights for educators, administrators, and policymakers to build more accountable and protective school cultures. And finally, I would like to introduce Elizabeth Clements, the founder and executive director of Hidden Water, an organization dedicated to helping individuals and families heal from the devastating impacts of childhood sexual abuse, CSA. With a master's of social work from Columbia University and a minor in law, Elizabeth combines her deep understanding of trauma with a strong commitment to healing and prevention. Since founding Hidden Water in 2014, Elizabeth has focused on creating safe, supportive spaces for survivors and their families to process their experiences and rebuild their lives. Hidden Water offers specialized healing circles where individuals affected by CSA can find connection and support in groups tailored to their needs. Survivors meet with other survivors, parents with other parents, partners, friends, and siblings with other partner, friends, and siblings, all who share the same experiences, creating communities of mutual understanding and compassion. These healing circles are designed to address the specific emotional and relational challenges faced by each group, fostering both individual healing and the potential for system-wide recovery. By providing these distinct spaces for support, Hidden Water helps survivors and their loved ones heal in ways that are empowering and deeply transformative. In addition to this vital work, Elizabeth has developed the Safer Adult Training, a comprehensive initiative aimed at preventing future harm. This training educates adults about recognizing, preventing, and addressing abuse from an interpersonal approach and a strong emphasis on skills, practice, courage, and fostering healthy boundaries. The Safer Adult Training inspires participants to practice proactive steps in protecting vulnerable individuals and cultivating a culture of accountability and care. Through Hidden Water and the Safer Adult Training, Elizabeth is working to shift the narrative around childhood sexual abuse, creating communities that not only heal, but are equipped with skill and support to prevent future harm. The Safer Adult program makes its debut in March 2025. This is the slide up when we rejoin the recording of the presentation. What Elizabeth was summarizing before starting the slides were some of the highlights of her work and what brought her to create Hidden Water. Hidden Water arose from Elizabeth's own recovery journey and personal experience with abuse within her family. Elizabeth recognized that harm caused by sexual abuse is not limited to the one who directly experiences it. It impacts the whole family. Like a family system, a boarding school has adults that collectively stand for parents and classmates and dormmates that are like siblings. Like in a family, when sexual abuse happens in a boarding school community, it affects the whole community. Elizabeth introduced the obstacles that get in the way of effective intervention in response to disclosures of sexual abuse. Alongside missing practice skills and knowledge about what to do, there is also a normal revulsion or ick factor that arises for many in response to talking about or even hearing about sexual abuse. Without overcoming this ick factor and practicing skills with support, even the most promising strategies to make communities safer can be ineffective. Beside the Safer Adult program for intervention and prevention, Elizabeth introduced the healing circles from Hidden Water, Elizabeth's original initiative to attend to family systems affected by sexual abuse. She spoke about Hidden Water's comprehensive model for healing, where circles are not only a resource for those who have experienced abuse, but provide healing communities for parents, partners, siblings, and close friends who are affected as well. Boarding school communities are macrocosms of a family, and much in the model of Hidden Water's program that Elizabeth lays out is relevant to the needs of a school community when addressing sexual abuse that has happened in its midst. So in this slide, Elizabeth talks about the responses to disclosures of sexual abuse. She's explained the consequences of reflexive reaction versus skilled response as a way to introduce the sexual harm impacts on family systems.
That's an oversimplification, of course, but the family is either going to react in a way that doesn't support healing, or they could potentially react in a way that does. But let's just say they react negatively, because that's often what we see. And they deny, they deflect, they minimize, they justify, they blame the victim. They tell them not to talk about it, etc. So that creates an ongoing harm, which then takes them back into acting in and acting out. And that can be someone's entire experience. And of course, we're here to talk about schools. It's true in any system, although my work focuses on families. Certainly true if the school handles it badly, if the church handles it badly, if the community handles it badly, etc. And so people blame the victim or respond in ways, they melt down, they make it about themselves, they're get tired of talking about it and then say, okay, well, it's time to move on, like that. If they respond positively, which is, to hold the emotional space, to to believe the person right away, to not see this as a one and done conversation, to see and join the person who was harmed on this healing journey, hold other people accountable to not just what happened, what the offender did, but also hold the whole system accountable for an ongoing response to the harm. And then the healing will start to take hold. So once we realize that this is actually what's just this type of negative reaction from the people around you is really coming from the fact that the family doesn't really know what to do. They're reacting rather than responding because they don't know how to respond. It just seems so big and so overwhelming, that they're in crisis mode until they don't have the stamina for it anymore, and then they're not. So we realized we needed to divide the family up into four groups. So those who have been harmed sexually, as a child or a young person, the non-offending parents or caregivers, of those who either harmed or were harmed or both, because a lot of, more than 50% of the time people are harmed by other young people. The loved ones that are directly impacted by the ongoing, play out of the harm, which is, often the siblings, the spouses, and the adult children. And then we include in our system those who have caused sexual harm to a child and are ready to take responsibility. We also, that it's not written here, but it's like people who are no longer at risk of harming and are ready to take responsibility. So we divided everyone into these spaces and we put them into circle. So a circle is a structure where you go around, everyone listens and speaks when it's their turn only, and we go around 3 times. But we've been doing, Denise is here, and we've been doing a research, qualitative interviews with our people, and what's interestingly coming back, that the structure of the circle is one of the factors that makes the hidden water healing system so profound. Um, and you speak in your order, and you can't just speak whenever you want. You speak in order. You listen to know others' experiences without judgment. You share to be known your own experience, and then we don't allow sort of this, this codependent behavior of like telling people what to do, telling people how they should feel, telling people advice, and it's time to get over it, or here's how I experience your experience. It's just speaking of your own experience and holding space for the others. And in fact, that starts to clear the trauma out of the system, because, oftentimes I think the family is breaking down because they don't know how to fix it. And there really isn't any fixing it. Fixing it and healing are different. And fixing it, is just, I don't know how you would do that as a system. But you have to start with this opportunity for boundaried listening, and not defensiveness and telling people what to do and when is this going to be over and tell me what hoops to jump through so I can be done with it. That kind of behavior only reharms the person who is harmed. And so, this is maybe, and I've helped other organizations in different countries even to overlay this model on top of a school system. So there was a school in Iceland where one of the girls was harmed by one of the boys at I said that high school. And the administrators really just said, oh, well, boys are going to be boys, what are you going to do? And the student body was so upset, they planned a citywide walkout, over this situation. And so, the people I have been training up there were like, can we use this for a school? Of course, that the girl who was harmed is green, and the boy who harmed is purple, and the teachers and administrators and parents are orange, and all the student body was blue. And you can see in that situation, as is in families, but it's very clear in a situation of a school, that there are bystanders with power and bystanders without power who are all being impacted. Not just the victim and the offender, but everyone is being impacted. No one usually knows what to do. And then you get, you divide into this team innocent, team guilty kind of thing. And you just don't have a holistic, nuanced response. So before I'm going to stop sharing for a second, just does anybody want to jump in or ask a question about that? I know it's complicated. Or Anne, do you have any add-ons to it?
I was just going to say, as a keeper for the green circles, one of the things I've heard over and over again is the pain of the witnesses who were there, who saw in some, either were there, saw what happened, or heard about what happened afterwards, who did nothing, and did not respond, didn't like just is one of the most painful experiences I hear over and over again from survivors.
Right. The betrayal of the system that should rally behind you, right? Okay, so when we decided so we started 10 years ago holding these individual circles based on these colors. Only the people who identify with that color are in the circles. We have long waiting lists, and it's going very well. And then as people, we will not work with a whole family in a circle until each person has been in their own individual colored circle that they identify with. And why that becomes so important is because they do their own work, they feel heard, they feel seen, they're learning how to listen with boundaries. They don't have to convince anyone of their personal experiences. It shapes them in a way and builds their stamina so that they can go back into their family system and hold space for other people's experiences. Um, it is a crucial element to it, because so many people want to do restorative justice, but if you just take all the people and throw them into a pot and hope that they work it out, they won't, because they do not know how to respond in a healthy way. They don't know how to respond in a boundaried way. They get flooded, they get overwhelmed, they try to fix it, they throw up their hands and say, how many times do I have to say I'm sorry, that kind of thing. And it just churns the harm. So um, our system had these two components: first, the individual's healing circles, then the family system, conflict circles, we call them, or multicolored circles. And then we decided to embark on our prevention, which was our third component. So it turns out that most prevention work is not addressing family members, where most harm happens. Most harm happens within the family system by family members or people close to the family. And most people think of it as happening outside of the family, but regardless, the family system is deeply impacted. Even if the person who harmed is outside, how the family handles that inside matters a great deal. So we got leaders from each of the colors, 15 people together, and we asked, what would have prevented the harm in your situation? So we have non-offending parents, we have spouses and siblings and people who were harmed, and people who have harmed, gone to jail, come back, and are trying to be accountable for the behavior. And every single person in that circle, when we were trying to build the prevention curriculum, said nothing would have prevented it. And we sent everyone off to all these various different prevention programs to learn what other people were doing out there. And everybody came back and like, yeah, that wouldn't have worked in my situation. And so when we started to boil down why would it not work, we came up with, that people can't overcome their own emotional flooding enough to actually address the harm. And so, Anne actually coined it as the ick factor. So that's like what we like to call it, the ick factor. People can't get over the ick factor enough to notice the red flags, interrupt, say something, hold the disclosure in a way that's healing. They're trying to make it go away. And part of making it go away is like minimize it, deflect, deny, blame the victim. Think, oh, well, that kind of thing happens. What are you going to do? I told him to stop, that kind of thing. So as we worked for months and months in this committee, we started to realize like we have to do the same thing we did in the individual healing circles, but for the people in the prevention. We have to help them build their stamina to have a conversation about child sexual abuse or boundary crossing or red flags or disclosures without becoming overwhelmed by the information. So we sort of call these safe adults. They're sort of safe adults and safe environments, which is somebody who's done the work to overcome their ick factor so that their eyes are more open and they can more compassionately intervene in circumstances that are happening around them in such a way that it keeps children safer. So a couple examples, I had somebody ask me to have this 19-year-old boy come from Switzerland and stay with us in New York. Um, my kids were pretty little, like I think my oldest was 9 or 10. And I said, sure. So this 19-year-old boy came and my girls were having a sleepover. So there's a bunch of 9-year-old girls there, let's say. And I could see he was flirting with one of them and singling that one out and, trying to be next to her, trying to be with her, going into the girl's bedroom. And I said, okay, come on, we're going to this play. We were taking him to play. He's like, I think I'll just stay here. Yeah, you're not staying here. Um, Sat him down and said, like I can see that you feel attraction to this girl and she's 9, and that's not an appropriate partner for you, although it is appropriate at your age to be interested in people of the opposite sex if you are. He was so embarrassed and so ashamed. I said, it's okay. You're learning, you're young, and it's not somebody who is not your age is not an appropriate partner for you. So I just want you to be careful and be boundaried about it. I mean, he would have probably died of shame. However, he kept the girl safe. I didn't, I said it as compassionately as I could, and I'm sure he'll never forget it. And nothing happened, right? But in order to be able, and I have done that many times in my kids' lives, and it really lands way more powerfully when we can do it without like pushing the red button, and like exploding everything. We can intervene much sooner. And one of the most interesting statistics I heard was that there are red flags for 10 years often before somebody actually reaches a point where they're harming someone at a level that could be considered a crime. And so if we intervened, if we could notice and say things out loud, people, I'm sure that people in this room have talked about child sexual abuse, but I'm sure you've also had the experience of you're talking about it and everyone clears the room. It's like everyone quiets down and they're like, why? My kids always say, if you talk to my mom long enough, she'll start talking about child sexual abuse. But most people are not that way, right? So I'm just going to share a tiny bit of and then I will turn it back over, but a tiny bit of our curriculum that we've developed. So we are going to do a 12-week circle, just like we do for Hidden Water or other circles, with 10 people who are interested in becoming safer adults. And we will do the same structure of, sharing to be known, listening to know, and not poking at other people, but just sharing your own experience. And we find the learning is profound when you're actually listening to other people. So, our goal is to create safer adults who can speak about CSA so it becomes less of a taboo subject, intervene and interrupt when necessary in boundary crossings or red flags, and then manage disclosures appropriately without overwhelming themselves and others. So we decided is needed is a safe adult must have knowledge and a nuanced understanding of CSA and how it plays out in systems. So that's pretty much what you get when you go to any prevention training is this basic knowledge, right? But then we feel like the number 2 is probably one of the more important ones, the ability to overcome one's own internal emotional barriers and reactions to CSA in order to take action. But first you have to know what those are and build up the stamina. So the way our system works is that we meet once a week for 12 weeks, because you need that time in between to like recover from this emotional endeavor of learning about this. The third one is to feel a community of support with other people who are also intending to be safe adults. That might be in your own sphere of influence, or it might be, you might get that initially just from the Hidden Water Circle. And then develop the skills. And so skills, not just knowledge, skills in order to influence your environment. So it was interesting when we did the pilot project, there were, the first week, we're like, okay, tell somebody in your life, we're trying to get people to influence their environment. So it's like, tell someone in your life you're taking this training. Like half the people couldn't do it. So some people are going to be at this place where even just speaking about this to people in my life is just overwhelming me. And, other people like me, that's not hard, but we started to divide the community of influence over like the safest people, the kind of safe people, the people are super not safe for you. And so we started to, recognize that these skills are not that easy, actually. It's not a given that people can even just talk about CSA in general. So we developed this idea of in the water teaching, which we said it's not a lecture at a dinner party. It's just a pebble that you throw in a lake and it has its rippling effects. So it's like just enough information to shift the narrative slightly, and then we back away. So if someone tells a dirty joke, and we say, hey, like dirty jokes, please, I don't want to reinforce, objectifying anybody sexually. Anyway, what are you doing next weekend? That kind of thing, so that it doesn't it might feel like a a shame event for a second, but you're moving on, so that we're sort of building up people's tolerance without overwhelming them, because the overwhelm is what keeps them from engaging in the information. So the other idea is we're trying to influence, not control or advocate. So I think a lot of times in sexual abuse, you see people try, like they get very, like, oh my God, this is somebody's going to get sick. And then they jump in and they try to control and they try to advocate. And then there's this back reaction. Like I was saying, so often at a school, it becomes like team innocent and team, perpetrator, whatever, team guilty. And it's like we want to stay away from creating those teams. And the prevention is really about like influencing the narrative, influencing the people that you have influence over. You don't have to go out into the world and do it for everyone. You find those pockets of influence that you have, and then start to influence the narrative about what's okay to talk about, how we talk about it, the way we look at it. And in that way, we can start to create environments where the floor is underneath people. It's not the first time they've heard someone say sexual abuse. I was just at a conference last week with people from all over the country who work in sexual abuse. And this one woman who sees all these cases said, I would never talk to a rapist. And I was like, okay. Like, first of all, I'm sure you talk to rapists all the time. You just don't know that's what, they've done that. And then second of all, like, that's the kind of attitude where the us and them, that isn't going to work. That's why 88% of families never, ever report child sexual abuse to an authority, because they don't see the us and them in their family members, or the parents don't see their 12-year-old who harmed their 8-year-old as, a victim and a perpetrator. We have to change the way we look at this if we expect families to actually intervene. And family members are the only ones who can intervene really in the home, because most of these cases don't get reported, as I've said, but also because the family, even if they did get reported and the family is actually the ones harming over time with the way they react. All right, so I think I ran out of time 5 minutes ago, but yeah, I'm gonna just pass it back to you, Anne. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I want to remind people to put their questions in the chat if you have any, and we'll get to them at the end. And I'm going to bring Charol on to take what Elizabeth has said. And the Hidden Water was designed for family systems, but family systems and boarding school systems, there's a crossover, and Charol studies boarding school systems and what has happened with sexual abuse. So I'm turning it over to Charol.
So I study actually lots of school systems and looking at what happens in schools, including boarding schools. And and what you've just heard uh, would, it seems to me, is the proper response to the research I'm going to tell you about, because the ways that we have looked at and in schools I call it sexual misconduct. The way we have looked at this is a way that hasn't made it easy or clear how to change things. And essentially, what has to be changed is a whole culture of how we think about this. And this is what Hidden Waters, one of the many things it gets at. So I started studying school employee sexual misconduct in the early 1980s, and I was a professor of in the School of Education. I'm an organizational theorist. I study how organizations work, particularly how schools work, and so lots of issues around it. And so one of my students, who, like most of my doctoral students, was a full-time school administrator and a part-time doctoral student, came to me and said, "Hey, I think there's a teacher in my school who is having sex with students. What do I do?" And I was like, I'm inside my head, I'm thinking like, how would I know? But I said, well, let's think about it. But first, why are you asking me? And he said, well, you're a feminist, right? I figured you would know the answer to all these questions. So I just want to pass on that if there are any feminists out there, you're seen as having great power and great wisdom. So we talked it through, we worked it out. Uh, he called the police. The person was arrested. The person went to prison, and you know the school moved on. But it got me thinking, and so I started a series of studies to look at how common is this, what are the patterns, what goes on, how do schools respond, uh, what happens to the targets, what happens to the abusers, what happens to the whole culture of the school, and how do people in the school who aren't either the target or what I would call the abuser, what do they do, and is there harm to them? And so over the years, I've done lots of studies, but um, I have a book that just came out in like this month called Organizational Betrayal: How Schools Enable Sexual Misconduct and How to Stop It. Um, the majority, although I have all those other studies, the majority of my research came out of work I've done as an expert witness when people have sued schools, when people have sued institutions for not protecting their child or for not protecting them. And when someone first came to me about this and said, would you be an expert witness? I had no idea what an expert witness was. And that was based upon the federal grants and the research I'd done, uh, is how they found my name. And I said, well, I will, but only if I can use all the information that I learn in in your case to understand what happens. I won't use names, I won't use schools, I won't use anything, but I want to be able to use this because when you're studying sexual abuse in schools, it's not very easy to get information. People aren't really interested in telling you what's going on or what happened or why did the principal not do this or why did the heads of the school do this or not do this and why did how did the other teachers react. And so I realized that by being an expert witness, I got to read all the depositions of everybody involved. I got to look at the school policies. I got to look at the training they had. I got to look at documents that I would never be able to have access to give me a really case study picture. So I've done about 400 cases of school employee sexual misconduct in all kinds of schools in practically every state in the country, K through 12 uh, populations. And this gets me back to Hidden Waters. So my the way I thought about how school employee sexual misconduct happened was that there was someone who had um, an attraction to children or adolescents, And they went into education because they had this attraction, and they took advantage of their position in the schools to act on this attraction. So that had been my view in the 80s and 90s. But as I kept studying this, what I really found was this. I found that there were people who had no particular attraction to kids, adolescents, young kids, or whatever. What they did was they sort of felt entitled or privileged, or they just felt a liking or an attraction for a particular person or a particular time. And they they got closer to the person. Sometimes that happened because the student came for advice. The student came for help in a course. The student came for some reason. Sometimes it came for other reasons. Sometimes it was the adult that reached out. But what happened was is that people in the schools saw this. They saw the student alone with the adult. They saw the student in a car with the adult. They saw the closeness. They heard the way the adult talked about the student. They saw this. In the interviews I've read, the depositions, they said, oh yeah, he said this, he said that. And the question is always then, why didn't you step in? Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you stop it before it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger at the early stages when you saw these things that gave you pause? And the people who worked in the schools who saw things would say, I was very uncomfortable with it, or I would never behave that way myself, and I felt it was a problem and somebody should have done something about it, or I was just really concerned, and yeah, it was clear to me that something was going on. I don't know what, I had no idea, but it violated what I thought was appropriate behavior. So I heard that over and over and over again. So the question is then, why didn't you act? Why didn't you speak to the person? Why didn't you speak to the head of the school? Why didn't you make a complaint? Why didn't you do those things that might have caused an intervention that may have stopped this trajectory toward abuse from happening? And by and large, the answers that came out in this, and often these weren't direct questions, it was people talking about their own experiences, was that, what if I was wrong? People would be upset with me in the school. Even if I was right, people would be upset with me in the school for causing, it would be me causing shame to come to our school, or it'd be me causing people to have to take sides. I just didn't want to get involved in that. I didn't want to be that person. And so what I heard over and over again was the lack of skills. That in fact, uh, first of all, people didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to intervene. They didn't have the language for it. They didn't have a way to think about it. And the culture of the school did not support. It didn't support having a language. Most of the training programs don't actually get people to practice reporting. They don't get people to practice how you say, I'm really concerned about your behaviors here. I'm watching you. I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, or if I see this again. I mean, there's lots of ways that you can practice intervening, and that you can practice reporting. But the people in the cases I've studied didn't have that language, and in fact, I didn't have that language, particularly. I wasn't born with that kind of language, and I wasn't trained in that kind of language, and I'm not a therapist, and I'm not somebody who has had any kind of training. And I realized that I could have been one of those people who didn't say something. Um, but then I realized probably I wouldn't be, because I had my own issues about this, and I felt like I would have had to have spoken out. But not everybody would feel that way. And also, the culture. I never worked very long in a culture that was so uniform that I would have felt that I would be um, uh, banished, or I would be punished for speaking out. But most people do and did. And so I thought, well, that's not really very complicated in a way. I mean, in a big way, I guess it is complicated because we need hidden waters. We need programs to help us do that. But in a small way, it's really teaching people how to do what you're supposed to do. And I loved how Elizabeth talked about, you don't have to make these big pronouncements. You can say it in different ways. You can intervene with this kind of language and that kind of language. And those kind of interventions, I believe, based upon my studies, would have stopped a great deal of the harm that came to kids. Because every time nobody said anything, the the person who was on that trajectory to sexually abusing the child crossed another boundary, and then another one, and then another one. And at every boundary crossing, convinced themselves that there was nothing wrong with this. If there was something wrong with this, someone would have said something. People saw us, nobody said anything, so I didn't think it was a big deal. And so I really like this program, and I like this approach, and I like the way um, that Elizabeth and others think about this, because I think in terms of my research, it gets to what I saw as kind of the major block that keeps what we now call bystanders, uh, that keeps bystanders from saying anything. And so it helps you, and you get to practice it, and you get to talk with other people. How would you do this, and how would you say this? And I think it makes a great deal of sense. I developed a prevention model, and the prevention model had to do with, helping people to speak up and speak out, and to develop a culture where speaking up and speaking out was expected, not just that you were that you took a chance, but that in fact developing that culture and developing the culture where people modeled that behavior, but also a culture in which you had policies that made it clear what were the kinds of boundaries you shouldn't be crossing, what were the behaviors that could lead you into crossing more severe boundaries, and why do we say you shouldn't do this, and also um, so policies and training and supervision, and also hearing and listening and reporting, because so many times there were people who reported, but they would do it timidly, and kids would report, but they would do it in a way that nobody it people that in the culture where people didn't want to hear it, they didn't hear it, because nobody came up and said, this teacher is having sexual intercourse. They wouldn't have said that, but is having sex with so and so. I saw them. I have it here on my phone. You can see. And even that, in some of the cases, might not have prodded people to speak out. But so the whole notion of what we hear, how we hear it, how we're able to say that, for instance, across all these cases in schools, um, the number one uh, the number one red flag word was creepy. Creepy. So when kid across cases, everybody said this person was really creepy. That's a word that describes somebody who was crossing these boundaries with students. Students didn't have the language about exactly what to say, but creepy was the word. And over and over and over again, I see the word creepy in the cases that I've studied. So my research sort of points really strongly to the kinds of things that Elizabeth is talking about in terms of how we can change cultures and how we can make a difference, and how it may be a little difficult and uncomfortable for us at first, but in fact, in the big picture, it's a fairly small step. We just need to have a culture in which you can take those steps and feel comfortable taking them. So I'm going to stop, just because I figured nobody wants to hear about all my research. But if there are questions or anything, uh, I'm really happy to go off on a tangent anytime you want. I just don't want to tangent out this platform.
So Denise, if you can bring Julia and myself and Elizabeth here, Julia and I have some questions that we want to ask Elizabeth and Cheryl and hear what they have to say. And some of them are like asking you to say more about something. And so the first question we had, which you have covered to some degree, Elizabeth, but if you have anything more to say about what holes you saw and were trying to fill when you took on this creating the Safer Adults program, and what outcomes do you hope that this program will produce?
I mean, I think that, it was very telling to hear 15 people in Hidden Water with their own personal experience of child sexual abuse say that nothing that they heard in some of these prevention trainings would have stopped the harm in their situation. And I think it comes down to what Charles saying is that there just wasn't the culture that would have held it. Even if, and some of those people did say something or tell someone, but it fell on deaf ears, or the family was like, oh my God, okay, now you stop doing that, to the brother or something. And then, of course, that's not enough. And so I think that the whole is huge. It's huge. If you think that, I mean, people, mandatory reporting, okay, that's not enough. That's nothing in a family system, really, because 88% of families would never call the police or child producers, and nothing like that would happen. Families are trying to deal with it on their own for various reasons, and people don't know. They don't have the language, they don't have the understanding. Not everyone who harms is the same. Like what Cheryl was saying is very interesting, like that people get to that point of harming for different reasons. It's not all the same, right? What was the second part of the question?
What outcome do you hope this program will
We hope we started, like the two things were that people were saying is, if I had told, or if my kid had told me, or if my sister had, when I thought this thing was going, if I had said it and someone had picked it up, then it would, even adults who are like, I was trying to do something, but there was no support. There was like none. Just like what you said, Charles, about I didn't want to tell because what if I was wrong, or what if everyone hated me? Like everyone will hate you. Like that is the reality of so many systems, that you're suddenly the bad guy because you said you think something's going on here, and then everyone attacks you. So how do you change that culture inside of the system and create the kind of adults that will support each other in keeping the environment safe? So I think that was one of the big things, is like someone would tell their non-offending mother about their grandfather, or their husband, let's just say their husband, or their, step parent or something. And the mom's like immediately goes to like, how will I pay the bills? Where will I go? How will I support us? Like what, like, I don't think so. I love him, like, and then shuts the whole thing down. But if that mother had known, oh, I can call my sister who's been taking this training, and we can talk about how do we unfold this in a way that doesn't do more damage, and confronts this person and keeps it safe, and so, whatever needs to happen in that particular, because I think you can't expect someone to hear for the first time their child's being harmed and then have all the answers fully baked, and all the language and all the steps, and have worked it out emotionally, internally, and been like, it's a, have the bandwidth even to just make it through that one conversation, much less the whole thing. So I think, we want to see that creating safe adults changes the narrative in the spheres of influence that individual person has in their life, which are several, right? And teach them the skills, and then build a support network of allies. So if something, and prevention is like intervene before the harm happens again, or happens worse, or like that. So it takes that kind of support, so you have to build that before, and then you can step in, right?
I want, because you brought up mandatory reporting and because we have a question from the registrations about mandatory reporting, and because the metaphor of the partner who's hearing the report about the mother hearing
Yeah.
about their parent is like the faculty or the administrator hearing,
Everyone's favorite teacher, yeah.
yeah, with mandatory reporting. Like there's a lot of ecology around what happens next when a student reports. And I would like to also like sort of focus on the steps before, like what can be done before we're at the place where somebody is mandatory reporting a sexual assault. And the culture in which this is in a different version of this, and a version I actually experienced in a mixed color circle at Hidden Water, where a child who had been abused was asking the police to help the person who harmed them. Like they had it very clear in their head that this is, by reporting, what they were doing was getting help for the person who had harmed them because they clearly needed help. If we as a community saw this as a gift, that someone reporting something is a positive step, that is a relief and then and welcome, and that the reporter is somebody wanted and welcome to do that reporting because it's helping everybody. That is like the ecology that needs to shift, where reporting is a good thing all the way along, and even mandatory.
Of course, then the response would also have to be support,
Yes,
as
yes.
opposed to like a jail sentence or an arrest. I mean, maybe I'm not against people losing their liberty if they're not safe, the community.
Well, the community, yeah,
I
the
think
community,
there's so many steps before that, right? To say,
yeah.
hey, I see you crossing boundaries. I see you seem very interested in younger people. Let's get you some help
Well, even
before something happens.
but the gift of Hidden Waters to be able to talk to people from the different circles. So even
Right.
talk to someone who has been through prison
Mhm.
and hear them say that they would not have gotten help otherwise, and they
Yeah.
needed. That was really very meaningful to me to hear, that they looked back on the harm they caused and that they needed to be stopped, and they wouldn't have stopped without the reporting. I would like every survivor to hear that and know that they offer um, their words, their reporting is not cause is actually a gift, is creating, can be a gift, and rather than a burden where they are the scapegoat of the community for having come forward and caused all these problems, because everyone has to deal with it now, which is so much more the case. So the question from the exact question was, how do we best protect a youth reporting abuse when abuse is subject to mandatory reporting? It is very complex, and the group of that Charol and Julia and I and some lawyers and some restorative practitioners and educational leaders have all been discussed this. There isn't at this time a great answer to that question. But until that is seen as a contribution to the community, and the burden on the survivor is taken by the community, and the survivor is seen as a positive member bringing forward information, mandatory reporting, and protecting a youth who is contemplating mandatory reporting from the impact of the community, from the lack of response to whom they might be reporting, from the consequences if it goes into a criminal case and they are now going to become on a timeline that's not theirs, a witness in a criminal trial. It's a very complicated thing. So I just wanted to raise that question now and here, and I don't know if anyone else wants to contribute anything more about that.
I think reminding people who do report and who speak out about how courageous they are is important too. So I mean, again, those are cultural changes to say, I know it took courage to do that. you know, and to reward that with really the language of courage. Uh, and I think we've started to use that, and we've started to help people understand that, but replacing those negative responses with positive, and saying, people who are courageous enough to speak out, are you one of those?
Well, thank
I'll
you.
go off our scripted questions to ask something that's emerged for me. And is that all right?
Yeah.
Elizabeth, I would just love to hear a little bit more of sort of, you were talking about the benefits of having these colors or affinity groups, that's the starting place of having people go through sort of in their smaller community before then coming into like a mixed group. And you mentioned sort of building stamina, building skills, feeling as, I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more on like what that seems sort of a key feature of this Hidden Water program, and sort of what is that magic that you've observed that's so critical to this program?
Because when you go into the circle, you're in this defended place often. You know that there, you know, we consider sexual harm a shame event, and then the shame event is impacting you in these ways where you're reacting. Makes sense, but and it's different for each of the different colors, you know, like people who are coming and being like, fine, my sister wanted me to come here because, you know, something happened when we were kids, but I said I'm sorry a million times, you know. Okay, that's the starting point there. Or the non-offending parents come in saying their own unique thing like that, which is like, I don't know what, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, and just tell me what to do and I'll do it, you know. When is she going to get over this, or when is he going to get over this, you know. Or they're also often, you know, trying to tell you the virtues of the person who harmed, you know. So I consider that kind of a defended place. You know, the spouse is often sidelined and really suffering. You know, the spouse of the survivor or the spouse of the offender, they're really being impacted, and yet they're sidelined because they're, you know, it didn't happen to them, and they're supposed to be supporting their person. And sometimes they come in really defensive for their person, or like that. So, and then of course the victims come in, you know, feeling like nobody sees me, nobody hears me, nobody can hold this. I have to either just squish it down and play along, or I have to lose my whole family, you know, like that. And so by sitting in a circle of people who are all saying some similar version of their own defendedness, they feel seen, they feel heard, they hear things that they never even thought but are true for them too. You know, and because the keepers are also people who identify as that color, they may say things like, this is what I learned, or this is what I realized, or this is what I, and then little by little over the 12 weeks, the person builds a different narrative of their experience. You know, first of all, they feel seen and heard from where their starting point, no judgment, nobody's attacking them. They get to say, this is how I see it. And for most of them, by the end of the 12 weeks, you hear them saying very different things. They're sort of holding the systemic harm, and they see the nuance in a way they never did before. And especially for the green, for the people who are harmed, they feel like, okay, I don't need my mom to get this because you guys get it. You know, like I feel like not only is this my experience, it's all of your experience, and it takes away that isolation. You know, for the people that go to the blue circle, like the spouses and the siblings, they're the victims in that circle, where they get sidelined outside of that circle. But there they get to be mad at the person who was harmed because of all the ways they acted out and played out, and it impacted their life. You know, and so by giving them voice and giving them a space where they get to like really sink into that, then they come back into the larger system different. You know, they're more able to, you know, have their feet on their ground. They feel heard, they feel seen, they feel understood, they see things they never did before. And they have sort of the stamina for, you know, interacting with one another. Is
I
that
just
it?
want to
No, I think that it's beautiful. I mean, I hear that sort of like the individual experiences are validated, which then gives them more capacity to hold space for others. And they have these sort of built-in allies who shared that initial circle with them of feeling seen and understood themselves. So no, it's a beautiful model, and thank you for elaborating.
Yeah, I mean, I think one like other thing is like, even if your family doesn't do it, right? Like you go to the green circle and you talk, everyone's talking about how their non-offending parent never believes them, always tells them to get over it, always makes it about them. And then they have that place to talk about that. Then they go home for Thanksgiving and everyone is disregarding it and telling, whatever, acting the way they've always acted. But somehow it doesn't hit them as hard because they have this group of people who that's also happening to them over Thanksgiving. And then they come back and they can talk about it again. And it's kind of like coming into relationship with what the family members are capable of. And they're not necessarily capable of showing up, but somehow it becomes less potent because of this allied group. Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight this. This is the Hidden Water Circles. It's not the prevention program that we're talking about, the 12-week circle programs. Not that this could not exist in schools for the same cohorts of people in the same position from having dialogue circles like this. I just want to tag
And
that.
also, I just want to say that in the prevention program, we do have some examples of something like that. Like we had an orange, or a non-offending parent, and she was in our circle and she saw a man on the beach taking pictures of these little girls down by the water. And she got brave from our circle, from our prevention circle, went up to him and said, "Do you know those girls? Then I don't think you should be taking their picture without their mom's permission." And he started, "I'm going to call the police. You're calling me a pedophile." Like he started freaking out. She was terrified, but he left, and then she came back to the circle and told the story in the prevention circle, and everyone was like, "Yay!" You're like, "You did it," And so I do think that kind of support was like, she didn't have to go home terrified, tell someone who's like, "Why would you do that?" She came to us, and we were like, "Yes, good job." Um, and it doesn't have to be more than that. She didn't have to like track him down and take him to court and everything. She just had to lean in with a different narrative on the beach with strangers. Yeah. But so I guess my point is just that it feels that same affinity space seems to really matter.
We had a question for you, Charol, about this book that you have put together, over your 30 years of more than 30 years of research. And what do you hope that the outcome of writing this book, where do you hope it to go, and what do you hope to see happen?
Well, if you're an educator, it means you're generally an optimist. So, so I'm going to give you my optimistic viewpoint rather than the realistic. What I hope is that people in schools will read it. I hope that people who prepare school administrators in schools of education will use it in their classes. I hope that parents will look at it and read it. I hope that kids will read it, or at least read parts of it across all the groups and have discussions in their schools and talk about, well, how do we build this culture and how would we do that? I hope they'll practice intervening. I hope they'll have the kinds of things that Elizabeth talks about. I mean, I hope to bring some awareness. Those of us who've been studying this a long time know that any place up to 17% of kids have been targeted in schools by an adult sexually, and that's a big number. But most people don't think of it that way. Most people still have a kind of view of this is the student, who wants to get a better grade, who's just a flirt, who does whatever. And even if all that were true, let's just pretend like for a moment that's true. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. They're the kids. In fact, it isn't true. It doesn't say there aren't some students like that happen. But the point is that we challenge our assumptions about what we really think. And we don't talk about our fears of being ostracized by our colleagues or being seen as that do-gooder or that, angry woman who's just wants to stop everything. So my hope is that people will use it as a tool for discussion and for action. And in the book, I try to give lots of action places. So for instance, I have lists and checklists of things that should be in your policies. Go through your policies, check on the ones you have, check on the ones you don't. I have checklists for what kind of training and what should be in the training. Check to see if you're training, because so often people will say, "Oh, we train on that. We do training." So I'll say, "Okay, great. Tell me about it." Well, we do mandated reporter training. We tell them, uh, well, and that's your training. And yeah. Is there other training we should be doing? And so my point is that understanding that there's more out there, and that you, as somebody in a school, can take these little checklists and check them off, and also use it as resources for supporting colleagues, and for changing that culture, and for making it clear that the kinds of behaviors that we have looked the other way in schools, even if it's not directly sexual misconduct, physical, we've looked past so many things, and not spoken up. I'm hoping that there's some conversation around this that will happen in schools. I'm forget it. I was just going to make a Donald Trump statement, but forget it. I shouldn't have.
I have a question for Charol. And I'm not sorry, for Elizabeth. And it's about the moral dumbfounding. That it's a phrase that was part of the prevention training, or the Safer Adults training. And in the context of it started with Judith Herman last year said sexual abuse is a community issue, and that requires a community response. And that really struck me. And the community as the bystanders, and that's like the faculty, the students in a school community, who are witnesses, and what stops them from actually doing more. The moral dumbfounding piece is a little bit like the ick factor, but it has a different quality to it. And I wanted to know if you could say more about that.
Well, you might need to jump in, but as I recall it, it's such a brilliant, phrase to be able to point at this one thing that happens, which is people get so overwhelmed by like the enormity of sexual harm that they just like blanket it over with some simple response to it, like, oh, all those people should just go to jail, or the new one that I feel like I'm very present to is, everyone's like, oh, no abortion except in cases of rape and incest. And it's like, yeah, except in cases. It's like, how do you think that would happen? Like, can you even imagine if people don't disclose for 25 years? How do you sort of blanket it over a huge issue with some little phrase and then done. No need to talk about it more. And I do think it is related to the ick factor. It's like, it's so enormous that I cannot overcome it emotionally, or even imagine the amount of energy that would have to go into it. So I come up with some little simple worldview that pushes it away so that I don't have to deal with it. That's my understanding of it. But, and you have a different memory of how it was.
No, I loved it so much, and it kind of captured something, and it speaks to the enormity, the ick factor too, of what, and even there, like, not, the idea that you've said, and I just want to like highlight it, that it's not something you can just undo in a minute. Ick factor doesn't go away just because I said, okay, I have a aversion to this and I withdraw from it. And I get like the dissonance of this happening, and the response is so huge, and I just get stunned and I can't move. like how to change that kind of response takes this like the pebbles in the water that we talk about, that making little moves, stepping back, and then being able to do it again, and being resourced by a community that understands what you're doing, that you're actually doing kind of a behavioral change task that requires a community and little steps, that you try something that's a little more than you would have tried before, and then you need to sort of come back and resource yourself in order to try again. And it takes a whole community to overcome moral dumbfounding and the ick factor.
And also just understanding that sexual harm is overwhelming to anyone, to anyone. Like you get to the point, I get to the point, everyone gets to the point, it's like, okay, I cannot listen to this anymore, I got to take a break from this, and then treat it like that's just part of the process of it. It's like we get overwhelmed, we stop, we breathe, we resource, we come back. We don't have to do it all at once, and we don't have to do it until it's fixed, or we can honor that it's hard, and that there's no simple solutions, and you can't just imagine bad guy, good guy, guilty, innocent. You can't, it's so much more complex when you look at it from a systems perspective.
Um, I see a question in the chat that is, how would one leverage the collegial environment of a school faculty to shift the dialogue and perspectives so that it's supportive of taking early action versus hiding and denying?
Is that for me or for you, Charles? You wanna, or AM?
Probably for all of us,
Yeah.
what do we think we could, I mean, just presenting it as an organizational issue, not as an individual issue. I mean, there are individual things, but as an organizational issue, what as an organization are we doing to make sure we've created a space in which hopefully nothing like this happens, but if something is of concern, people feel empowered to speak up and speak out and to intervene. And so thinking of it as an organizational tool and an organizational issue as opposed to an individual issue. And of course, we have school administrators who part of their job description is to think about the organization and what you need to do, but it doesn't have to just be that. It could be the faculty organization that starts the discussions. It could be any layer. But thinking of it as an organizational issue, I think in some ways can get the conversation started, because it's not pointing at a particular individual, but rather saying, as an organization, how has our organization, how do the way we behave in our organization, how might that diminish people's willingness to speak up, or how might it encourage people's willingness to cross boundaries, and how can we talk about that and think about that?
I would also add that I think if people didn't think that saying I have a concern about boundary crossing means I've called someone a pedophile and they should go to prison, like that there could be incremental, stages where, I know of a case right now where, a girl at a college, hooked up with a guy, and she said it was consensual, but one little part of it wasn't, and she just feels like yucky about it. The boy is completely over him. He can't believe it. Like he's so ashamed, and so he didn't think that anything wasn't consensual. That's a very different situation than a friend of mine telling me about her daughter's college, where a frat roofied this girl, and multiple people harmed her sexually. Like that's a different scenario. And like if we don't have sort of a nuanced reaction to these circumstances, but that the moral dumbfounding comes in. If anyone says anything sexual misconduct, okay, we go right to like roofied and raped and, like that. And it's like there's so many things in there, and we want disclosures of boundary crossings. We don't just want disclosures of harm, you know? And so, if someone was talking about getting the, whatever the roofie medication is, that should be disclosed. That should be the thing we report, not the afterwards. And so if we got the organization to start to think in increments, like that there is like these stages that you could report, and this isn't pushing the red button, it's pushing a button but not the red one, that sounds the alarm. I think people would report more. Like they would report if they thought there was a humane response, to to the behavior that we're worrying about, without turning that person into a pedophile. Yeah.
I also wanted to, I'm thinking about this question about, and particularly to a program like the one that's being developed, the Safer Adults program, is that it's accessible, to anyone, and we're getting involved at all levels of the community, like faculty, being able to take this program because they're interested, and not because administrators are taking it and saying that you have to take it, but to I know it's time and all, a lot of investment, but that it is driven by concern and care and desire. Everybody benefits from a safer community. It's easier on everybody to have a community that's working.
And also, like, our Safer Adult program is really about you doing the interpersonal work to be a safer adult wherever you are, like at work, at home, on the beach, at a playground, that you move through the world not overwhelmed by the ick factor or the moral dumbfounding, and you play in small compassionate ways that change that environment wherever you go. But that's interpersonal work. And I think sometimes organizations like, okay, get all the teachers together and give them this lecture, and that's not interpersonal work. And so it might teach them, but it won't overcome the ick factor at the moment that they need to overcome it.
Right, right.
What would
Also,
it be like to have people from all different levels, from the trustee to the administration to the faculty to the student leaders to the parents to all have
and I'm
unique
adding I want us to think about another group in schools. What I find is custodians, lunch workers, clerical secretary workers, they see a lot of stuff. And they particularly feel that they'll lose their job, that they'll get in trouble. And if they say anything, the organization will come together against them, because they see themselves as being viewed as unimportant to the organization, as expendable. And so can't tell you how many cases in which custodians come in a room to clean up, take the trash out, whatever, come across something happening, but don't feel either empowered or don't know how, or just worry about losing their job that they very much need.
Yeah. So the comment in the chat is that the staff of these schools are often confidants of the students too.
Yes, absolutely.
I have a question, Charol, about the schools often, like, in order to justify the expense of programs, they want evidence-based. They want research proven. And trying to find what's not there, like improvement is measuring the absence of. How does does the focus on proven success help or hinder the development and implementation of promising programs, especially when it comes to acknowledging the complexity and multifaceted ripple effects of sexual abuse and misconduct?
Well, I think it probably does. I mean, I understand why we want evidence that we're spending our money wisely, that we've chosen a program that we think will help. it's also the case that we might think about it in terms of actually thinking through what the program does and trying to understand and making our own judgments about whether or not we think that might help in our school. So as someone who does prevention research, we can't really document something that doesn't happen because there's been education. We can't randomly assign some people to this program and that program and then make sure that we've staged an assault in these places. And what you can't there's no way to do what people think of as quote unquote science. So the best we can do is have measures of, do they say they would do it? Or looking at case studies and how do they respond? Or in some cases doing, role playing and how would they do it? But the truth is that the research that identifies whether or not something is going to work when we're talking about stopping a behavior that's harmful, it won't show that. It won't necessarily show that. It may show that people have a better understanding of what the issue is. It may show that they believe now that they might report, that they feel that they might say something. But we don't actually know if that's true. Will they actually do that? And so I think part of choosing programs, and I'm not against wanting to look at, evaluation studies to see if it works. Of course, I'm not against that. But I think we have to really understand the limitations of evaluation studies for certain kinds of things. So, if you have a program that's trying to teach kids how to spell better, you can actually see, do they spell better? Because you can have words that they spell before and have words that they spell after, and you're able to say, hey, this program must work. Kids are doing pretty good on their spelling. That's really hard to do in this thing. So instead, I would say, let's look at it from a kind of ethical, moral, behavioral standpoint about what we think would work with the people we work with, and about what are the frameworks that this program comes with, and do they seem like they're strong and defensible frameworks? I guess is what I would want to say.
I have a sort of it's sort of follows with that question, is that you have studied this for over 30 years and you have been an expert witness, as you said, in over 400 cases. And I know that your conclusion has not been, has been about what hasn't worked. But within that, have you seen anything promising in your research? Any common traits or approaches that have stood out to you?
Yes, actually seeing people who have formal power in the organization saying, we're going to do this, I'm going to lead this, I'm going to make this happen. I also study the people who have informal power and what they can do. But a person with formal power who puts this up as a centerpiece of a safe school. We all believe in safe schools, right? Well, this is one way to make a school safe. And also just seeing how common sense this is. If we smell smoke, we don't say, it might be smoke, it might not be smoke. Maybe somebody's just smoking. Maybe it's something in the chemistry lab. Maybe it's this, I'm not going to do anything. And trying to get people to think common sense wise when you have a concern. And leading that and being the person who speaks up for it, for programs, for support, and modeling it, and modeling when somebody crosses boundaries in language and another thing, saying something, that. So I think there's, I certainly think I have a great deal of faith in school people who go into education. And it's a little rosy, I understand. And I understand that the people who I study are the people who went into education and did bad things. But most all the other people don't do bad things, but sometimes they don't do the courageous thing. And they need that support, and we need to see ourselves that way, as one of our jobs is speaking up. That's what we're here for. That's one of the things we're here for. And so people who can model that as both formal and informal leaders, and when someone speaks up, we say to them, thank you, and we say it publicly. And if somebody says something at a faculty meeting about, I'm concerned about something that a trend I see about people spending time alone with closed doors helping students, and then everybody jumps on them and says, oh, you're just making something out of nothing and we're helping them, and what, you don't want us to help students, you don't want us. Well, standing up and saying, no, I think it's important. That was a courageous thing to say, and are there other ways we can do this to get the same outcome but do it in a safe way? And so I think we have hope.
It just makes me think about the enormous burden faculty bear to support students, to be witness to so much. The courage to speak up it's so costly. To build support systems around that is vital in order for that to work, because that's the front line often.
It is.
I think we're coming to the end. There's one other question. There was a question in from the registrations that we don't have the expertise among us. Is more of a legal question, but there is one from somebody. It's a more personal situation that I think is probably been answered by Elizabeth about how to support their daughter or their child going through a legal process who is, it's a very emotionally traumatic process. And Elizabeth, I imagine this would be something that at Hidden Waters would be able to. You want to say?
I mean, we have that happening a lot. Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that the child is an adult, but maybe not. But either way, I think one of the things is always saying, we're going to get through this together. Like this is going to suck, period. And we'll do it together. And like always, I think it's always so helpful to take the meta view. Like this is not going to be good, but you're a hero for doing it, and it's going to be hard and it's going to be emotional, and I'm not going to leave you, and we'll take the hits together, and one day we'll look back on this and be proud of ourselves that we did it. Like I think that when you think about people who've been harmed, they often feel so alone, like so alone in it all. And and it's hard to know how to be there with them, next to them, without being like, tell me what to do so I can be better, so I can be fixed. Because then the survivor feels like, oh, now I have the burden of making you feel better, that you're helping me, instead of, sometimes. So I'm just coming out with my book. Thank you, Denise, for reminding me. Which is called Healing Together, and it has whole chapters on non-offending parents and how they can show up for their kids. And it isn't easy, but I think it's, if you think of it metaphorically, like you want to stand next to that person and just be in it with them. There are days you're going to laugh, there are days you're going to cry, there are days you're going to scream, and days you don't want to talk about it, and you can't fix it, but you can make sure that person doesn't feel alone in it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody who came, and I want to thank Charol, Elizabeth, Julia for this dialogue. I also want to let everyone know here and on the recording that Julia and I are going to have dialogue circles, 2 of them on, I don't have the dates in front of me. I think it's on the 15th and the 20 something. I will
send it around with the recording as well.
Yeah, that'll come out with the recording. And I apologize, the very beginning of the recording was cut off. We didn't start it on time. no big deal. Everything that was wonderful is in the recording. You just missed the introductions. If anyone has anything else, and if not, we will say goodbye and good night and thank you, or whatever time of day it is for you. But I really appreciate everyone's time and willingness to listen.
Thanks, Anne, for organizing, and Julia.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you for doing this. This is really wonderful.